morning. Welcome to Christian Companions. This is a normally 10:30 a.m. Bible study for people 55 years and older. And if you are a regular, which the vast majority of you will be, this looks very weird. This is different. I'm in my office. This is my wall. My computer's here. My desk is here. Basically, this is just easier for this week. And there's a lot going on. A lot going on in the church, and things are starting to come back because people are getting vaccinated and people are being safer and restrictions are lessening. So here we are. I'm just going to be in my office today, and next week we should be back in the normal spot for recording. Still working out some details on when we can meet back in person. Hopefully we'll talk to all of you soon. Like I said, it's just been kind of busy lately. But here we are, and I'm excited to be back. I do want to offer an apology. I took about 3 weeks off inadvertently. The week before Easter, I'm going to be honest with you, just busy. Like, it's just been a very busy season here at church. And then Easter happened and was doing Easter things. And now here we are. The week after Easter, it was busy, and now we're here. So it's a little easier now to do a video, to record. So my apologies. I'm excited to be back, though. I'm excited to meet in person. I really can't wait to. We'll talk about it soon. I'll talk to all of you individually about it, but they're just working out some details about space and timing and all sorts of different things. But it'll be so nice. I'm seeing more and more of you at services, and it'll just be nice to be able to see you in class and chat and talk. Can't wait. Anyhow, today's April 18th. We are in Nehemiah. I'm excited to be in Nehemiah. This is one of my favorite books. It's very historical, and it's not a lot of heavy theology, so we'll probably be pretty quick through this. But I love Nehemiah. I love the history of it, and this is a good little section. If you notice, I'm a little askew. I'm not right dead center. That's because I'm gonna use this part of my wall as kind of a green screen. So this is where I'm gonna put scripture. It won't be at the bottom. I'll put scripture. If I have I'll draw this on the board. I'm actually probably just gonna draw it later and put it up here. So we're gonna have a pretty fun day with this blank wall behind me. Maybe when I edit this video, I'll put like a dinosaur behind me or something to scare me all of a sudden. I don't know. Anyway, Nehemiah 2, 11 through 20. That's where we'll be. You can follow along if you have your books. If you don't have your books, let me know. I'll send you a book, or just follow along with us. We'll be right here. So let's read Nehemiah 2, 11 through 20. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, "Let us start rebuilding." So they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you are doing?" They asked, "Are you rebelling against the king?" I answered them by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding, but as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or in any claim or historic right to it." And that's what we're talking about. So, a little less in context for you. Jerusalem had been a distinguished city, the political and spiritual capital of the nation of Israel under David's leadership. Solomon added to its greatness by the magnificent temple that he built there. But following the division of the nation and the rise of ungodly kings who allowed idolatry and accompanying abhorrent practices to flourish in the land, Jerusalem became filled with such wickedness and evil that the judgment of God fell on it. In 586 BC, the Babylonians finally breached the city walls following a siege of 18 months. The city's state of massive disrepair still existed in the time of Nehemiah, some 140 years later. Nehemiah was cupbearer to Artaxerxes, that's Nehemiah 1:11, king of the Persians, who ruled from 465 to 425 BC. The Persians had conquered the Babylonians in 539 BC. Cyrus, ruler of the Persians at the time, had permitted any of the Jews who desired to do so to return to their home. Approximately 50,000 did, that's in Ezra 2, but there were those, such as members of Nehemiah's family, who chose to remain in Persia. Nehemiah 1 describes what happened in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, which would have been 445 BC. Nehemiah received news from his brother Hanani, of the sad state of affairs back home in Jerusalem. And Nehemiah 1:3 says this: "Those who survived the exile are back in the province, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." So deeply troubled over such disheartening conditions, Nehemiah responded with tears, fasting, and fervent prayer. He confessed his own sins and the sins of his fellow Jews and begged the Lord to honor his promise to bless his people if they turned from their sinful ways. Nehemiah then asked the Lord that he might receive favor from the king. That involved Artaxerxes granting permission to Nehemiah to travel to his homeland of Judah and lead an effort to repair the wall and the gates of his beloved city of Jerusalem. Nehemiah's request included protection for the journey, and also provided provision of supplies needed for the project that were planned. While the king did indeed grant Nehemiah's request, Nehemiah knew that any favor he had been shown had come from the Lord to whom he had prayed, and whose gracious hand would be seen time and again in the upcoming endeavors. When Nehemiah arrived, he gave the territory administrators the letter provided by King Artaxerxes that verified the king's support for Nehemiah's undertaking. The letters also confirmed the king's allocation of the resources needed for the rebuilding efforts. All right, so that was a lot of lesson context. One thing I'm kind of sad they missed out on, it's believed, some believe, that the queen to Artaxerxes is Esther, because it talks about how the queen was present with Artaxerxes when Nehemiah made the request to return. And that's a little bit of an odd statement to make, since the queen in this time and in that place it would have been more of a, what's a good word for it? A status. It wouldn't have been such a big deal as to be mentioned. But the fact that the queen was there, they think, well, maybe they mentioned the queen was there because it is indeed Esther, which would be part of God's working plan, which is really cool. That God said, well, I'm going to make the queen a Jewess, a person that believes in me, so that she'll grant this request of Nehemiah. Just a little fun aside, but yeah, that's what's going on here. Nehemiah is going back to rebuild Jerusalem's walls. He's going back to kind of try and restore his homeland, and he's been granted that, which is a strange thing to grant. Imagine, there's not really even a good, it's basically the king of the land said to a distant city from the capital, you're allowed to rebuild and strengthen yourself, which would then give you an opportunity to fight against us if you wanted to, because you're going to rebuild the walls and the defenses. It's an interesting thing. So that's the context. That's what's going on. Let's just jump right in. Let's go to verse 11. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, that's verse 11. The journey from Susa, the capital city of the Persian Empire, to Jerusalem was nearly 1,100 miles, a daylight walking pace of 2 miles per hour for 6 days per week, resting on the Sabbath, of course, means a trip of about 3 months' duration. The 3 days, therefore, provided some needed rest for Nehemiah after such a long journey. The break also gave him the opportunity to plan his strategy, an approach he would use again before confronting another problem. Yeah, I mean, it's across a pretty good desert. I mean, you'd have to, Susa to Jerusalem isn't for the faint of heart. That was a trek and a half. So 3 days makes sense. I don't think there's you can try and make a numerological connection, like three, like a significant thing being 3, the number 3. 3 days that Jesus was dead, 3 days travel, 3 people, the Holy Spirit, Father, Son. People try and make these kinds of connections a lot in the Bible especially, or ancient texts of, if you see a repeated number, that's important. Sometimes it is. 12 nations of Israel, 12 disciples. I think there's a significance there. I think this is just 3 days. I think this is more historical than anything, just by the way. Verse 12. I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me, except the one I was riding. Nehemiah was aware of the fact that not everyone in the territory was on board with what he was planning to do. Thus, an excursion by night, under cover of darkness, was most likely the best way to examine the city and assess what needed to be done. Only a few others needed to accompany Nehemiah on such a mission. Perhaps they were residents of Jerusalem who knew the layout of the city and could serve as guides. Or they might have been trusted advisors who had also traveled from Persia and could offer wise counsel. There was also no need for a large number of animals whose sound might attract attention to the group. Nehemiah was secretive about his intention to rebuild Jerusalem's walls and gates. Disclosing his plans too early could put the entire enterprise in jeopardy, so Nehemiah bided his time to gather information. His sense of appropriate timing was a quality that made Nehemiah a capable leader. Yeah, these are all good things. I do like that. It's just the idea of let's take as little as possible, and the idea that he is an exile, or he's a child of an exile, really, because this has been centuries since his people have been taken over by the Babylonians, and his people have been taken away from this land. And so he's probably never even seen Jerusalem. Like, I doubt he took many vacations to Jerusalem as the cupbearer to the king. And so this is the first time he's really seeing what's happening, seeing the gate, seeing the state of the city. He has this deep pride for it, but he doesn't know what it looks like. He doesn't know where the important gates are, where the walls are the most damaged, these kinds of things. And so he's going to do that. But also I like that idea that, like, let's be quiet about this. That's important, because just like, if I started building a 3 foot deep cement cinder block wall around my property, people would probably start to have questions if I was starting to build a castle around my house. And it's kind of the same thing. If a city in ancient times started to develop and build walls and get what seems prepared for defense and offense, the neighbors are going to get a little nervous. And so that's fair. That they're like, let's do this quietly. Verse 13. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well, and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. And the commentary says this: it appears that Nehemiah did not make a complete circuit of Jerusalem, but only of the southern area. At the same time, locating precisely some of the places cited is difficult. At the same time, locating precisely some of the places cited is difficult. The Valley Gate appears to have been at the southwestern side of Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles 26:9 records that King Uzziah of Judah built a tower there. Nehemiah 3:13 notes the repairs done to the gate itself in this section of the wall, and includes the details that it covered 1,000 cubits, or about 1,500 feet. The location of the Jackal Well is disputed, though it is often identified with the Pool of Siloam on Jerusalem's southern side. The Dung Gate may describe the gate leading to the trash dump in the Hinnom Valley to the south of Jerusalem. This also required repair. The scene before Nehemiah was very much in keeping with what his brother Hanani had described to him. Nehemiah's survey of the walls and gates must have disturbed him. It's one thing to hear a report of destruction, and quite another to see it firsthand. Yeah, that's good. And you can see from this map, hopefully I have a map up there right now when I'm recording. It's not up there, obviously, but where everything might be or could be. But yeah, I think about people who go to help after hurricanes, or go to help after tornadoes. They hear, there's a tornado that hit Joplin, or there's a hurricane that hit New Orleans, or what have you, and they go to help, and they hear about it and they see it on the news, but when you get there, you're just not prepared for that level of what it looks like. So yeah, I'm sure he's processing in a big, big way. Verse 14. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there's not enough room for my mount to get through. The fountain gate was possibly situated in the southeastern wall of Jerusalem. The king's pool may have been a part of King Hezekiah's project to bring water into the city to improve its odds of survival in prolonged sieges. The rubble at the pool was so excessive that the mount Nehemiah was riding could not get through. This detail emphasized the enormity of the devastation he found in Jerusalem. Yeah, so there's so much rubble his horse or donkey cannot make it through this section of Jerusalem. Which, I mean, again, imagine you're driving down Rock and you have to turn onto Meadowlark because at the intersection there's so much damage and destruction you can't drive through it, let alone, or you can't even walk through it, let alone drive through it. That'd be significant, and in our hometown, that would be like, oh my gosh, this is awful. This is destroyed. So, verse 15, very quick. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The valley, this is the commentary, the valley mentioned here is probably the Kidron, name also attached to the accompanying brook east of Jerusalem. Nehemiah thus retraced his path going back to the valley gate where he started. And then let's just move right to 16. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. And this is the commentary for 16. This verse again highlights the secrecy of Nehemiah's journey by night. In these initial planning stages, there was wisdom in gathering information and considering his plans carefully without questioning a large group of people about the strategy needed to address the required repairs. To have done the latter may have resulted in immediate negativity. We can't do that attitude. See the better approach next. I think that's true even today. I think it's, first of all, he surveyed the area and then retraced his steps, finding it too difficult to keep going because of the rebel. That's verse 15, which was quick. I just wanted to kind of breeze past that because it is just restated. He went back to where he came from. But verse 16, I love that. Like if we as a church said, this is our goal for the next building project, or this is our goal for Derby, or here's our vision. A lot of the time, today, if we said that at South Rock or any other church, we said, this is our goal, this is our vision, this is what we want to do, there's always going to be at least one person going, that's not possible, or saying, that's a dumb idea, or whatever the case may be, and they'll leave. They'll either not want to participate, and so they'll go, or they'll not want to participate, and so they'll kick up a bunch of dust and make a fit about it. So it's just funny that people never change. I mean, a person can change, but people in general have been the same for a long time. So let's keep moving. Verse 17, then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruin, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. The commentary. Nothing is said about the span of time between Nehemiah's excursion and his meeting with the groups named in the previous verse. Most likely, he convened them as soon as he could, given that the condition of the wall left Jerusalem vulnerable to attack. There was an important emotional reason to have strong walls in a city too. The city was an object of derision and mockery, a disgrace in its current state. Jerusalem was the holy city, the site of God's temple, and needed to be maintained in a way appropriate to this distinction. Thus, Nehemiah described the decrepit state of Jerusalem as something that was not only troubling to the residents of the city, but also disdainful to outsiders. Nehemiah used the first-person plural pronouns, we and us. He identified with those who were concerned about the dismal condition of Jerusalem. The solution, as he saw it, was the practical value. Rebuilding the wall offered protection as well as going a long way toward rehabilitating the feeling that Jerusalem itself was in ruins. 3 considerations to determine where ancient cities were built. 1, access to water. 2, access to trade routes. And 3, defensibility. A great city needed all 3. A city without walls was vulnerable to enemy armies. Nehemiah 13:15 through 22 reveals a way that the completed walls would help the residents of the city obey God. Yep, that's all good. Think about all the major cities in the world, especially ones that have been built from old, and all 3 will check off those boxes, which is really neat. That at some point humanity realized we need fresh water, we need to trade with other people or within ourselves, and we also need to be defending ourselves. It's just interesting. But yeah, imagine, again, they want to rebuild Jerusalem for safety, for civic pride, but also this is a city that represents the greatest things that God has done, right? This is the center of their faith. It's hard to really show, because being a Jewish person is something that you are in faith, but it's also something you are ethnically. And so if Washington, D.C. was not only our capital, but also somehow where our church center was, it's like if the Vatican City was also Washington, D.C. Like we not being Catholics, we don't have too much stake in the Vatican City, but still seeing the Vatican wrecked would be somewhat traumatic. You would say like, oh wow, this is like the center of a religion that we're related to being destroyed, but also it's like your capital, Washington, D.C. That'd be a sight to see. It'd be devastating. And so that's part of the reason why they want to do this. It's a disgrace. 18a. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. Nehemiah was speaking to people who perhaps had become rather skeptical concerning God's plan and purpose for them and for the city of Jerusalem. Over the years since the return of the exiles from captivity in Babylon, various attempts to rebuild Jerusalem had been thwarted. See Ezra 4. At first, Nehemiah's proposal may have sounded like just another plan that would meet with failure and simply add to the people's disillusionment. But when he spoke of the gracious hand of my God on me, he offered reason for new hope of success. Throughout the Old Testament, the mention of God's hand represents the work that God does in the world. When Nehemiah came to the Lord in prayer after hearing of the sad condition of Jerusalem, he noted that the Lord had redeemed the covenant people of whom Nehemiah was a part with his mighty hand. Nehemiah was able to provide evidence that God's hand was at work on his people's behalf. Previous rebuilding had been stymied by opposition, again, Ezra 4, but at this time Artaxerxes had given his approval and full support to work in Jerusalem. Even so, the true king, the King of Kings, was the one in ultimate control of his people's welfare. Yeah, man, I really like this commentary this week. I think nailing some good points on even the historicity of the events. The idea that, look, Artaxerxes is on board with this, but also our God is on board with this. Like, this is his city and we are his people. Let's get to work. I like that. I think that's very, very well commented on. So let's keep going. 18b. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. The commentary says this. The people's response must have emboldened Nehemiah and lifted his spirits. The fact of God's powerful hand leading and blessing does not eliminate the need for human hands to do their part. He prefers to work through people instead of just accomplishing his purposes all on his own. We also note that group opinion that swings one way can just as quickly go on the other. Nehemiah 4:10, for example. Yes, this is good. So yeah, they're gung-ho. Again, probably the idea of they're living in a city where they know that they can be destroyed very easily because they have no defenses, but also knowing that this is the cultural center of their faith. Having seen other building projects torn down or stopped, they're like, this guy seems like he's ready to go. We have the king's approval. Let's get to rebuilding. Let's do this. Excuse me. Verse 19. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you are doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? So the commentary, Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official have already been introduced as villains, Nehemiah 2:10. Any worthwhile undertaking for the Lord is bound to encounter opposition of some kind. Consensus is desirable, but is not always achieved. The word Horonite may indicate that Sanballat is from Beth Horon, a town about 12 miles from Jerusalem. Though likely part of the northern Israelite tribe of Ephraim, he always opposed Nehemiah's work on behalf of Judah and Jerusalem. The Ammonite people located east of the Jordan River had long been enemies of Israel, and Tobiah was no exception. He was related by marriage to some of Nehemiah's companions and had many supporters among the Jews. Arabians were also a Transjordan people. During the Persian period, 539 to 331 BC, they engaged in much trade and commerce. Geshem may have been opposed to any program promoting the welfare of Jews if he saw it as a threat to his business dealings or his vested interests. An accusation of rebelling against the king had succeeded in halting an earlier rebuilding effort, but Nehemiah had the full backing of the king. He knew the claims of his critics were baseless. So basically we have Sanballat the Horonite, who's probably from the north, which means he doesn't really like the south. was true in America in the 1860s, and it's true for Jerusalem, or it's true for Israel after the split. So the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom didn't really get along, and Sanballat, being from the north, seeing Jerusalem, the capital city of the south, being built up, he goes, not on board for this. Tobiah is an Ammonite, and the Ammonites, while related to the Jews, were not big fans either. And then, of course, the Arabian people are descendants of Ishmael, the son of Abraham and brother of Isaac, who will just always be opposed to anything happening in Israel. As God said, he is a wild donkey of a man, that Ishmael. So yeah, these are just enemies, and they think, hey, here's how it stopped the last time. Are you trying to start a coup? Are you trying to start a rebellion? But luckily, Artaxerxes has already signed off on this, so he's not too worried. Verse 20a, I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. So this is the commentary. There is no record of Nehemiah's mentioning King Artaxerxes in his reply to the scoffing of his enemies. Instead, he appealed to a higher court, the God of heaven. Since God had guided Nehemiah to this point, Nehemiah knew that God was not going to abandon him or the people who had committed themselves to start rebuilding. Yeah, I love this part. They're like, are you trying to start a rebellion? And he just goes, our God's on our side. Don't worry about the king. Like, he doesn't even mention the fact that the king has signed something and approved it and given it to them to start rebuilding. He goes, no, it doesn't matter. Our God's on our side. That's what matters. Great response by Nehemiah. 20b, he continues his response. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. The Hebrew word translated share is used to refer to God's division of the promised land among the tribes of Israel. Any portion Sanballat had as an Israelite was revoked when God sent the 10 northern tribes into exile for their faithlessness. Regarding the idea of historic right, the opponents did not have the historical ties to the city that Nehemiah and his co-workers did. They had no legal claim to interfere with what Nehemiah was doing. With the king's complete support, Nehemiah boldly drew a clear line that would remain intact despite any continued resistance that his enemies directed his way. Yeah, so he's like, not only is God on our side, but you have no skin in the game. Why are you here? Like, you're just worried that we're building Jerusalem? Like, our God's on our side. You don't have any worries here. You need to go. Yeah, great little back and forth between those two. All right, you probably saw a little glitch there. That's because my camera decided to turn off on me, as it does every now and then. So, I hope you enjoyed this week. Really, the moral of this lesson, I think, is just, man, when you have a direction from God, we ought not be worried about opponents. And whenever you see, whenever I read in the Old Testament about the temple or the rebuilding of Jerusalem, like Nehemiah is trying to do, he's trying to rebuild the walls so that the temple can be reestablished and there can be worship for Judaism. Whenever I read these things, I think about the temple today, because we are the temple, right? We house the Spirit of God within us now. That's what the temple is doing in Jerusalem, and that's what the temple is today. We are the temple of the Spirit of God. And so whenever I read things like this, where Nehemiah has all this zeal to protect the temple, to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the walls, I think about how we ought to interact with each other. And it's just so important to read into that, to read into Nehemiah when he's surveying the walls of the city. And then he's going to people and saying, this is what we need to do. And then when there's opponents, he's going, okay, well, our God's on our side. We can so easily apply that to our own bodies and to other people as well, going, we're the temple. So let's survey the walls. Basically, let's look within ourselves and see where we're lacking, where we need built up. Let's go to other people and say, hey, I need your help building up. I need your help being built up in this. And then when there are opponents or there are times of struggle, when there's a Sanballat in your life, you can go, man, my God is on my side. I need not worry about you. You have no skin in the game when it comes to this. I'm the temple. But also realizing that other people are the temple of God too now, and that we ought to be the builders. We ought to be the ones helping assess and building up them as well. So I just really like any kind of Old Testament temple talk, and it's always worth realizing that we're the temple. So that's all I have. Until next week. Again, so sorry that we took a couple weeks off. Just it has been crazy here, but we are back on track, I hope. And I'm just excited to be talking. I'm excited to meet back in person. Again, this is on my side, just figuring out details and space and time and all sorts of different things. But I'm excited, and I hope that soon we'll be able to meet in person. I think it will be, if not by the end of April, by May. So if you're comfortable with that, and of course I'll be recording all these no matter what, even when we're back in person, just in case you're not feeling like you're safe to come back yet, we'll still record. So anyhow, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or want to tell me I'm wrong, you can contact me in any way. I won't do the thing, but my email address, my contact information, hopefully is like right here somewhere, nowish. There you go. But get a hold of me. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk to you. But that's all I got. So until next week, we'll see ya.